So thanks all for joining. I will take you through an introduction to API governance and how to scale API programs, how to remove friction and to grow with speed. This has been created based on engagements with a lot of organizations. And we have learned basically from them as they have learned from us. And this is a kind of result. So it will contain a few tips and tricks that you can use within your organization while scaling API programs. Maybe one side note, I can maybe share my screen for that. In the Google Meet, there is a button at the top here, which shows a speaker chat message balloon. If you click there, you can put in chat messages for your questions. You can also unmute yourself, but please do so after the talk when we go into Q&A. Okay, so let's get started. APIs are not new, of course. We've all probably been dealing with APIs for quite some time. In yesterday's world, people were really focused on scaling API runtimes because they were actually getting up to speed within APIs. And probably when you start with APIs within your organization or within your scale-up or startup, it's really about getting things up and running, making sure that APIs are available. There's probably a few people involved within an organization, and it's really good oversight on who's doing what. But as you grow and as the future looks like for tomorrow, you'll probably be dealing with a lot more APIs within your organization. And really you are probably moving your focus to scaling API programs, where there's a lot of different initiatives within the organization, a lot of different business units working with APIs, probably all of them sharing data together, some of it being exposed outside of the organization. And suddenly there's kind of a different world and different requirements. And since you're here, since you're probably interested in API governance, this must be some kind of transition that has happened within your organization. Maybe a bit of a history on APIs. APIs were typically used to get systems to talk to each other, point-to-point integrations. But we have seen, and I've been dealing with APIs in the last 6 years, that APIs have become more and more used for different purposes, where APIs are a kind of way to provide access to different pieces of data, to expose data to different front ends, web front ends, mobile apps, maybe a Google Home that you talk to, where there's an API behind. And with that, API has become more and more integrated into business cases or kind of the success of an organization. APIs were kind of the foundation to find new sources of revenue or stay competitive, innovate faster to face your competition. And all this has actually led to where we see that APIs are now also being used for transformation, really new business models. And that could be in the form of a partnership or in the form of a platform business model, where an API forms kind of a way to create digital partnerships and build that ecosystem. And as APIs become more and more used on the right side of this slide, we see that it's very likely APIs are exposed beyond your corporate walls. And with that, of course, also becomes more and more important to actually think about security of these APIs, and also to govern these APIs properly in order to increase the security. So I fully agree with everything that Patrick has said about it being super important to focus about API security, especially if we see APIs being used more and more also outside of the organization. I have a great example of this where actually APIs are exposed, and maybe security or governance wasn't really on top of mind for everybody, or the governance process wasn't really up to speed to actually make sure everything was checked before being published. We all know this car, a Nissan Leaf. It is a futuristic car that is completely electric, and it also has an app with it that communicates with an API. Through that app, you can get all kinds of information about the car, the charging, the charge of the batteries. You can turn off or turn on certain features like the air conditioning and all that. And the API looks like this. So there's an endpoint, and it is called AC remote off request, which is probably turning off the air conditioning. It has a few parameters. language code, time zone, and a vehicle identification number, the VIN. That's a unique number that identifies this car. And with this API call, you can turn on or turn off, in this case, the air conditioning. And that looks really fine until you start to think about security. Because people really can call this API without any form of identification. You could say, well, the vehicle identification number is a kind of difficult number to guess. It could be kind of a way to that is a secured. You really need to know your own car and your vehicle identification number before you can do it. That's just one thing they forgot to check, and that is that the vehicle identification number is not so secret as it appears. It's something that is really visible from the outside of the car. So of course, this is all fixed. This is an issue from a few years ago. It's just I love this example as a way that API security and governance could really help keep your APIs up to speed and up to par. So governance is important, and governance could hopefully solve these kind of mistakes. But how to do this? How to properly do governance? Well, I've gathered a few statements that I've seen from our customers. For example, we want to migrate all the APIs we have, and these statements, they look good. But if you can think of it, it might block you, or it might add a lot of friction. So for example, migration of all the APIs, that's of course a good practice. All the APIs are in one place, but often a lot of APIs are point-to-point, have low traffic. They're not really built for consumption. So to migrate all those APIs into a single platform where you can apply governance and all and expose that will actually add a lot of overhead, which is maybe not the first kind of priority that you want to have in your organization. And you often will see that the traffic of these APIs will decrease over time as they become less applicable. Another statement that I've seen within my customers is that they doesn't want to involve business because of any excuse. Yeah, we actually feel business needs to be involved, especially if you want to improve your APIs, if you want to put in innovation, if you want to build APIs that actually have a kind of consumption, that are built for consumption and are built for actually adding value to the business. Without business involved, you are probably moving towards the IT organization building inside-out APIs again, focusing on what data they have that they want to expose, instead of what data is actually needed or what solution is needed and what needs to be exposed. Other things we've seen, what is the leanest team possible to support APIs within your organization? And of course, low cost is good, but you will probably be strapped on resources. You can't afford to do anything on building adoption or adding the right security or governance on top of this. And before you know it, you will actually have a kind of a friction in keeping up to speed with APIs. Another thing we've heard, after training, you get access and it's all yours, free for all. Sounds good, right? But you will probably introduce a kind of Wild West, where people will start to use APIs for all kinds of reasons without a lot of governance, right? So this is typically a sample where it becomes a kind of a mess, and then traffic goes down and people lose interest in APIs. Another one, you have to review certain requirements or certain list of requirements or checkpoints with us for everything you do with APIs. So this is adding a lot of friction. It does introduce a lot of quality, right? And it might have helped with the Nissan case I've just presented, but it's also a lot of bottlenecks, right? So reviewers dislike the job. People find a way to sidestep the process. And as we go faster, do you really want to trust quality with this kind of review process? So one moment, I need to accept a few people to let them into the meeting. Okay, there we are. I'm kind of the administrator of this meeting, and the only one in that can do this. So, okay. So welcome for anybody who just joined. I will continue now. So the last one I have here, we have guidelines and best practices all on the wiki, so people can find it there. So it's good. It is a good place to really where people can find the guidelines and how to involve security and how to govern APIs. But the problem with this is it's not really clear if anybody is really reading it, and people are typically not really fond on going to wikis to follow the letter and to really implement it. And also in time, the data on this wiki will become stale, will become out of use, and then even less people will start to use it. So why I've put this all on, just to give a bit of a clear idea and what kind of dimensions we have to move around governance, right? We don't want to add a lot of friction and completely stop innovation, because then people lose interest of APIs. But we do want to introduce a way to manage APIs and to govern how they're being exposed, how they're being built, and to add security on it, for example. So the traditional solution for that is the IT governance, big capital G governance, I call this. It's a bit like the police enforcement. It's really about rules and gates and making sure there's reviews. We need an approval before you release anything. It's a manual process. People really want to check everything, go through what you've built and maybe your design before actually it's being approved for deployment in production. Right? So a lot of documents, guidelines being involved with that, and review teams which are going to go check what you've done. And there's a lot of time spent into this on alignment and on the politics. So if you apply this to a kind of an example of an API, let's assume we have an API for turning off the air conditioning on a random car. We have to go through a few steps before we can launch that. There's an architecture review where they check how we have built security connections, what kind of backend systems are involved, how we exposing that specific API. Then they want to review how the API is designed, what kind of security protocols we have used, for example. Are there SSL, TLS certificates, or implementing OAuth, for example? How does the API really work now as it's been designed, and is it according to the standards we've set? Yeah, that's maybe also the other step. Check the kind of standards documents. Is this API using the naming conventions? I don't know. Is version control implemented in the API in a way that we have set within our organization? And then last thing, maybe a lost deployment checklists to see if you have all the necessary information, if you have all the necessary approvals before it can actually be launched. And as you guessed, this is probably a lot of rework, a lot of extra time, and a lot of friction, which kills speed in the organization. And speed is key in order to innovate, but also to keep people interested in working with you on APIs. So this is probably not the right way to do it. We need something else. We need API governance in a way to reduce risk, but still enabling teams to go faster. So we have done some research and we've talked to a lot of customers, and we found a new paradigm for this, where we focus not so much on enforcement, but on enablement, not so much on policing, setting policies, but on guiding people to do the right thing, to not really have a lot of gates in place that slow change, but really have a way that we can accelerate progress, and that is built on trust instead of control. So this all sounds promising, this all sounds good, but you're probably wondering, how can this work? Well, it's about giving people more control and not doing everything, checking everything manually, but having a lot of things built into the way people work. Moving from a center of excellence, where it's kind of the bottleneck, and checking and putting friction in place, to allowing people to work with guidelines and standards that have been set. And that is a shift from the really IT-driven enforcement type of governance to a little g governance. Governance with a lower letter, or a smaller letter, which sets principles and empowerment. It focuses on training people, giving them information, just enough information, so that they can get started. It focuses also a lot on automation, automating compliance, for example, by IT tools like CI/CD, or pre-built solutions that can be used. So we give people the right tools and documentation instead of reviewing what they have done. And in that case, the API team or the governance team will operate in 3 different modes. They can still be the policeman, being kind of capital G, but only for the must-win battles, where for the core features maybe. And they will look at the standards. But most of the times they can be the teacher. They can allow people to find the right information, set the best practices and standards, and offer them expertise and enablement. And the last thing is where they can be the referee, where in order for maintaining a kind of impartial role, judging different discussions and making sure that the right thing is being done. balancing the different needs and making a decision on it. So let's apply that to our example of this deployment checklist, right? What can we do really in an organization to enable this kind of API governance? Well, one of the things that we've seen that works really well is to have an API platform or a technical solution in place where APIs are living on. This can be an API management platform. And this platform typically allows a lot of the different things that are quite important for security. Applying threat protection, access controls to who has access to the APIs. Also a security governance platform, also where you can check audits and compliancy with certain standards that you've set. It's a place where you can get information to how things are being operated, but also you can make sure when an API is deployed to this platform that the security has been automatically applied to it. Security is built into this architecture. So a connection, for example, from this platform to different backends in your own infrastructure on-premise or to public clouds, actually already apply TLS, certificate-based authentication, so that you can make sure there's a kind of level of security actually coming with this platform. It doesn't really matter if you then expose that to internal apps, partner apps, or maybe to customer-facing apps. It is all landing on this same platform. So with that, you also get the option to do things like this. Let's imagine we have two APIs, one for employees and one for products, just two simple examples. And maybe people used to build security into that API manually or by adding some rules and checks into it. And this means, of course, this needs to be checked. If somebody has built security into employees API, we want to see how they implemented it and if they actually made that API secure enough, or if they accidentally chose to implement a vehicle identification number. So what about moving this away from the individual API implementation and putting it kind of in a shared resource? So applying security on API on how to identify or authenticate or authorize can actually be applied to kind of a shared model and can then be reused by anybody building APIs. So the third or fourth APIs coming after this can again reuse this. It will save time, but it also applies a kind of governance on top of it that you always know the right security has been applied. And you can also then do this for other things like DDoS protection, quotas, threat protection, error handling. And on top of that, it allows kind of separation of concerns, where a security stakeholder can concern himself building the right security policies and making them available for all the API teams. And the API team who's defining the APIs and making sure that the APIs work can actually just pick and choose which security protocols they need for their solution. Another thing that works well in this is by building security into your software development tooling or your deployment automation. CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development is typically how we see that people automate deployment of APIs. And it goes through this life cycle from checking in source code to fetching the source code to then running tests and security compliance reviews, then deploying it into production so it can be reached, then running integration tests on that endpoint, and then publishing all the results. So as you can see from the red rectangles here, a lot of API governance controls can be actually added to this flow. So automatically for every deployment, you know there's kind of code quality test that has automatically be run. There's security and compliance reviews that can actually be scripted and then automatically applied to. When things are not adhering to the standards, it will automatically be blocked. But when you know when an API has been deployed and gone through this deployment, you know all the things have been checked and are in order. So this can, for example, check versioning of APIs, naming conventions, certain security policies to be present in the API, and all this can then be reported in a single place for the security stakeholder to check it. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here is that you can do all this and then still miss a bit. Like there's always hackers or threats that can come into your API. So on top of this, you need a way to actually start monitoring how things are being used at runtime. Are APIs actually behaving as we expect? Are there big spikes or drops in traffic, which could mean somebody is misusing it? Could also mean we have still made a mistake and people are misusing that mistake. So what you want is a way to monitor this, right? And actually be kept up to date on how the APIs are being executed from a developer application issues or also more APIs in the design of the, issues in the design of the API, or more on the platform, like a deployment or a gateway error, or maybe connection error to backends. So you want to have a way to actually keep up to date with this. So a security platform, or actually a security monitoring platform, will actually help with this. So that's the kind of summary that I wanted to give in the time I have today with you. But let's see, have we really gone faster if we are doing this? So let's again look back at our flow, where we do an architecture review, then design reviews, checking standards, and then deployment checklist before we can launch. So an architecture review might not be necessary completely anymore, because a lot of the architecture designs and architecture requirements can be built into that API platform. I already mentioned auditing, connections, security, the TLS that you can apply. So you know when an API is actually deployed on that API platform that you have within your organization, you can make sure certain architecture requirements are automatically met. API design reviews, same, can actually be built into the API platform. I gave the example of the security policies and authentication that you always want to do. If you make sure it is a kind of reusable component that can be automatically or can be chosen to be applied by somebody, you know that when an API is deployed on the platform, that some design requirements are actually built in at runtime already. And the third thing, internal standards review. Well, you can do that through the automated build. I've shown you the CI/CD pipeline, and a lot of things can actually be automatically part of this. So naming conventions, version handlers, I don't know, all these different things can be made sure that they are already checked. And then the last thing, a kind of deployment checklist, so that you know that all the things have been checked. Maybe you always want some human to check things before things get launched. I fully understand that. But a lot of the things, and at least the reports, can already be generated by your CI/CD pipeline, so that you have the checklist already somewhere displayed for you in order for you to do the final approval. So key takeaways is that we have seen what works best is to really think about security and governance, but not to do it in a way that it actually inserts a lot of friction in your process, because it will block you from success with APIs. Success with APIs come from the speed that you can gain with it. Speed, scale, and quality. That's what we typically say to our customers. So API governance is not a center of review, it's a center of enablement, right? And you can architect a lot of security up front in the API platform. You can centralize security policies, so make sure that they are automatically applied or built into the runtime. And you can standardize on inclusion of a lot of enterprise policies around quotas, checking input parameters, for example, checking kind of user access and all these kind of things. And make sure that you automate a lot of the Q&A, because humans make mistakes. If you automate, and make sure that deployments and standards are automatically checked, and there you'll make sure that no human can make a mistake in that could cost you, or that could be a kind of a security risk in the future. Yeah, so with this, I've taken you through API governance. I focused a bit on API security. Of course, governance is a lot more than that. I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this point. I'm not sure about how much time we really have for questions, but let's. I'll end my presentation so that I can see you again.